Oh yeah, this is a really fun thing where we're going. If you just watch, your brain will forget it. But if you kind of sketch along with me, you'll be like, "Oh, I see what you're doing," and then your brain retains it so much better. So run right now, get yourself a pad of paper, or just you know get into the recycling bin and pull out a few sheets. Or if you've got a journal that you regularly use, you can keep all those notes in there. All you need is a pencil, but if you've got other favorite drawing supplies that you'd like to use, grab those and we'll use them. I think that drawing mushrooms, in addition to going to the fungus fair, is probably one of the best ways to learn them, because it really makes you look hard at them. And if you and observing deeply is the secret to learning this stuff. But we tend to kind of walk up to somebody and says like, "Oh, that's this mushroom," and you go like, "Oh, that's that mushroom," and then a few minutes later you're like, "What was that thing?" But if you stop, you slow down, you sketch it, then your brain is going to be really nerding out on all the little wrinkles and details, and you'll notice stuff that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. Also, if you don't have a field guide with you, you can make a sketch of it and use that to help you identify it later. Yes, you could take a photograph, but this way you'll really see it. If you haven't drawn in a long time, don't worry about art. Think of this as trying to get a bunch of information down on your page and the more kind of data dense you get your page, the more useful it is. And I'm going to show you a bunch of ways to cram a whole bunch of data and information into our sketches. And what we're going to do is we are going to start with kind of a Platonic ideal of the mushroom. And we're going to look at that. And then we're going to pull out a real mushroom. And we'll be identification challenge. So if anybody thinks they know what this is, pulled from a local park in San Mateo, type it into the chat, but don't hit send yet, because we'll let everybody kind of get their guesses. If you're one of the mycologist people, if you think you've seen this before, don't hit send quite yet. We'll do that at the same time. This was growing nearby. Maybe that's one of those that's dried up a little bit more. Perhaps. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start with kind of a Platonic ideal of the mushroom, and then we're going to kind of move on from that model to drawing the real thing. I think you're going to find it's a lot of fun, and there's some geometry that's a little bit counterintuitive, but once you get that, you're like, "Ooh, I really like my mushroom drawings." So get your pencils ready. And pencils, pens, whatever you like using, it's all good. So this is not going to be specific to any one media. Whatever you like to sketch with, or whatever you've got on hand. I tend to do a lot of my drawings these days with a ballpoint pen. Today I think I'm going to be using a pencil. It really, so it's not media specific. Cool. And at any point, anyone's got a question, just boink, say, "Hey Jack, I've got a question," and then that's good, and you can ask me your question live, and we're good to go. It'll be a lot of fun. You ready? Let's talk mushroom. I'm going to start with just a little bit of a sketch of some parts and names of things, just so, actually, no, you've had that class before. Let's draw a mushroom. Here's my mushroom. This is my mushroom model made out of Play-Doh that I made myself. I'm very, very pleased with that. And I've got my cap and I've got my stalk. All right. And the what I want to do to get us started is just think a little bit about the geometry of these parts. And then we're going to think about how do we get that shape down on paper. If I draw this view, well, actually, I can even use the real mushroom for this. If I draw this view, it's a pretty straightforward drawing, right? If I draw this view, That's also a straightforward drawing, a little bit more complex and complicated. But things get really interesting and really fun when you draw this view. So a little bit of the underside, or a little bit like that. You see more of the top. But sometimes when people kind of like, oh no, that makes me feel, that's kind of scary. We're going to look at how you kind of get these shapes basically down on your piece of paper. And we're going to be kind of using a combination of looking at the real things and looking at the model, and also kind of drawing a basic diagram. Once we've got that, then we'll be in a place to take this beautiful mushroom that I found, and I'll be making sort of more of a careful drawing of it, perhaps a little bit more careful than I would if I were just out in the field making a quick field sketch. So because that will also show you some of the more kind of science illustration tricks that I found that help you draw these, and it'll be fun. So let's bounce over now to the Wonder Cam. Let's go there now. Whoop. Welcome to the Wonder Cam. Hold on, I'm going to change my microphone so I can be more easily heard when I'm over at the Wonder Cam. One moment. So Avea, can I be clearly heard?
Yes.
All right, here we go. So, mushroom from the top. All right, draw a circle, but you already knew that, right? But here's a cool way to draw a circle. You want to draw yourself a better circle. If I draw a circle like this, I get this weird kind of lumpy, not very round circle. That doesn't make me very happy. How can I make a more pleasing circle to myself? The secret is to start lightly and see how that's not a perfect circle, but I keep kind of going over it, and I'm looking for where this little circle kind of bumps out a little bit, where it kind of bumps out. And as I kind of circle around here, as I circle around my circle, I start to figure out, like, yeah, that's the line I want. There. And so instead of trying to hit it with just one line, I am going lightly, loosely. I needed a little bit more on the top there. Okay. And then I start pressing a little bit more firmly, and I've got my circle. So that's a great trick for fast circles. Don't try to hit it in one line. Some people can do that. It's kind of a party trick. If I'm drawing that from the side, I've got a flat bottom on the bottom of my cap. Different caps have different shapes and heights. I like to kind of do the same sort of thing. I'm going to lightly say to myself, all right, I've got kind of an arc like this. And if I kind of lightly do it first, I often end up much more happy with the shape that I'm getting. Now, let's bounce over to the real thing for a moment. So let's say I was drawing this from the top. What I'd probably do is have more of a vertical oval to get myself started. And so here's a little vertical oval. And then I look at that and I kind of say there's a little notch over and on this side. And then over here, there's a little divot. There's a little divot that comes in, and then it pooches out over here. And, oh, these smell good. Oh, hit send. What are these? If you think you know, you can hit send in the chat. And so I get something, a shape that kind of matches it a little bit better. But I do the same thing where I start with those lines. Let's see, what do we have here in the chat? A shaggy parasol. Chlorophyllum brunium. Oh, very cool. Anybody who's got any cool notes and details about these that you think are interesting for people, you can add that into the chat. Another thing I like to do is kind of notice where the center of it is. On this one, there's a little bit of a depression there, and it's a little bit darker there. So just to sort of show where that is, I'm going to put in a little bit of the kind of darker shading in there. All right. And then
Actually, it might be good for everybody who's not intending to talk, just hit that mute button that you have on your screen. And so there's kind of this one has sort of a dark patch in the middle, and then these little nuggets of the skin, all around there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a series of lines sort of connecting and following that edge, getting a little bit smaller towards as I come in here. I don't have to follow it line for line for line, bump for bump for bump for bump. Sometimes people do that when they're making a very careful scientific illustration, but for something like this, I am trying to get the feeling of it. And so as I come in towards the center, I'm going to make some of those smaller, and I would do that around that whole shape. If I'm looking at it from the side, this one looks kind of like a hamburger. So if I start with kind of a little hamburger drawing, well, I need the hamburger on the screen. There's my hamburger. A little bit of my hamburger on the screen. I first block in that basic shape, saying it's roughly this big, roughly this wide. And then what I do is I'm going to come in and press a little bit harder. And as I do that, I'm looking for these little interesting imperfections. Very often it's the imperfections in a shape that make it look really interesting. So you see this little ding here, and you kind of see a little bit hanging, whoops, right here. So there's a little place where it's kind of chomped or broken. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, as my line comes around and I draw it, I'm going to try to have my line kind of suggest some of these little imperfections. And that's just the shape, but now it just looks like, I don't know, like a ragged earthworm or something. It's not looking like it's a cap. How do I suggest that this is a cap? Well, I'm glad you asked, and you came to the right place. Let's go back to this model again for a moment. I am going to imagine that there are some, I'm going to put some lines across it. Here's one. I'm going to put another across here. I'm going to put another across here, all connecting in the middle. And these lines do an interesting thing when you start to look at the shape. Just draw some more kind of coming up here. When we go back to kind of looking at this side view, let's check this out. So I've got these lines converging towards there. Now let's take a look at them in more of a side view. And notice that, let's see, here we go. In the middle, they come straight down. If I rotate this to, now this one's in the middle, the one in the middle is coming straight down towards you. You see that? But over on the sides, what do? Over on the sides, they curve, they follow a curve. Straight in the middle, the most pronounced curve will be on the outside edge. So these curves that you're going to be seeing in here are going to be not as curved as this outside edge, not as straight as this. The closer they are to the middle, the straighter they will look. And all of those point up towards the top right in here. So if I were to try to sculpt this and try to make this side view not just look like an angry hot dog, if there's a little bit of a, you see how there are little cracks in here? See the little cracks? if those cracks are in the middle, those little cracks are going to be coming up like that. But if those cracks are at the side, here is the angle of the side. So the closer they are to this side, the more they are going to be following that curve. The closer they are to this middle, the straighter they're going to be. So somebody, let's say there's a little crack right in here, it's going to be not as curvy as this, it's going to be not as straight as this, and I'm going to get something in there. So these little lines help somebody look at this and they go like, oh, you're talking about something that curves down on the sides. So just with those lines, I can communicate a lot of information about this shape and this structure. Ooh. But wait, there's more. Let's get the stalk or the stipe into the game here. So here is so not technically a stem. Look at this beautiful pattern. Oh, you got crazy when you dried up. Whoa, that's amazing. So I've got this stalk coming down. Let's call it a stalk instead of a stem because that makes us think plants. And if this is the middle of my mushroom, I want my stalk coming up and pointing towards that. And stalks are going to have some different interesting features. Sometimes they have what's called a ring. So see this little part that sticks out here? That's a little ring that was once attached around here on the edge, and as this thing grew, it kind of broke off. And so you look at this, here's another example of that. Here is this kind of crazy skirt, this ring, and it has, it can stick out, it can flare up, it can dance around like that, so it's like it's kind of spinning and its skirt is poofing out. And then we've got this big swollen base here. Oop. And the skirt is happening somewhere in here. Right. So I want to make this look like it's this little ring. So a few things that help is in some places I might be looking at the side of it, in some places I might be looking up underneath it and be able to see some of the part underneath it. So if I'm drawing that, I'm going to have this come down, this side come down and out onto it. And then I'm thinking about those same sort of curved lines. We're looking around the edge of a kind of curved object here. So little bits in the center are sometimes kind of more straight. And then in here, mine is turning up. And I'm seeing a little bit of the underside of it. So I'm going to, here I'm drawing the bottom of this, but then there's this little dark shape in here. I'm going to draw in the shape of that dark shape. So here's the dark part, the underside. And then I am going to kind of wrap my top edge around that. And if I see that underside surface here, I don't necessarily see it over here. Right. And I'm going to put a few little lines into my stalk here, just to make it a little bit kind of look more fibrous. Now, what about, let's look at around the base of this, of the base here, or the top of the sort of swollen part on the bottom. The same thing that I had here with, let's kind of just go back, let me draw this in here. Just kind of go, remember this, here's the basic pattern. the closer I am to the edge, the more I'm going to curve. And I'm going to be straighter when I am not, when I'm not as close to that edge. And if I took just this bottom part of it.
Could you
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Sorry. I was trying to, so I've got, I've got the, again, closer I am to the edge, the more I'm going to curve. Straighter, really straight. More curvy. And so see how these lines are pointing towards this little point in here.
Oh, sorry, Jack, could you lower again?
Thank you. I'm so glad you're here to keep me honest. Right? So notice how these lines here are they're pointing up towards this part up here. So if I think about that as I'm drawing this part here, then I've got my little base that comes down, and I'm going to imagine them little lines pointing toward a dot right in about up in here. And see how now they're kind of coming down straight. And I'm thinking of those just kind of coming in here and pointing up that way. Put a few little stripies in here. That really helps me be able to suggest this flare out around the base. So a top view and a straight on side view, these are really useful views in a mushroom. Something that is fun to do, to take that a little bit further, is to do a cross section of a mushroom. So let me back up just a little bit because I know I'm going to go off the screen here. All right. So if you have a knife, and we'll see how well this works on this one, if it doesn't cut it because it's too dry, then we'll just have to, I'll draw the 3/4 view one and kind of come, I'll cut one open after I draw this one. I know that one will cut. But let's see how well this one does. If you take a mushroom and slice it in half, if you're really young, cutting with a knife is something that you're going to want to do with the supervision of your family. So I'm going to try to get this thing sliced in half. There we go. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Isn't that interesting? So I've got this view, but another really useful view is the I've just been cut in half view. And I'll show you kind of a neat trick to help you draw your I've just been cut in half view. If it's not really wet, what you can do is put your mushroom down on your page like this and really quickly trace around it. Is that cheating? Oh, no. It just is useful. It's practical. I'm not really, because things like this little skirt are, because things like the little skirt are kind of move, I make just sort of a loose, like that's not a very, detailed or I do it really lightly, but that gives me enough to be able to then say like, all right, I've got my cap over here, and this side, I want to see how, something I think is really fun to look at is how do these gills attach on the underside? And this view allows me to get that really easily. So I'm going to start just by drawing this kind of fleshy part of the cap, and I'm ignoring these pale gills down here. So there's two sections. There are these pale parts, those are the gills. These are the surfaces that the spores of the mushroom are born on, and they float out and can start a new fungus going. And then there's this fleshy part up here. You can see little holes where beetles have been nibbling their way through this part up here. And so what I will often do is I draw not the gill part, but here is that underside of this thing. And actually that comes down, it comes down to a little lip. So there's the top part, it's got a little cap. It has a stalk that comes down. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at how do these gills attach to this central part. These ones, they come in here, and before they get to the stalk, look what they do. They curve in and they embed into this, so they're not attached to that central stalk. Sometimes you'll see them kind of actually attached to that central stalk, but in this one, they're not doing that. So my gills are in this area. And here are my gills. Stopping here. Now, it looks like there's a few shorter gills that I have that come in and are not as long. So I'll just draw in a couple of little mini gills in here. But this little side view allows me to get a ton of information really, really fast about the structure of this. I want to make this little side a little bit skinnier. And then my skirt attaches here. My skirt attaches here. My little ring. I come down onto this base again. And I want to pay attention to the shape of the base. Is it a cup? Is it a little heart-shaped thing like I've got here? Sometimes you'll have interesting forms with that. And I can also note are there any colors or patterns that I have on the stalk here. So for instance, here on my stalk, I have sides that are darker. On some mushrooms, when you cut them open like this, what you'll see at first is it'll be white, and then it'll start to actually change color in front of your eyes. So when you first cut it open, note what colors you have, write those down. And if it changes color, some will turn blue and all these other weird things. So write those color changes down. And in this, I'm noticing that this is the area out here where I've got all these beetle holes. So I'm going to draw in all those beetle holes. It's interesting that they're out there. I see some up in here, a few out here. Whatever you notice, put it down. And you're thinking like, those just look like dots. How would you know that those are beetle holes? One way is you can draw a little line to it, and I'm going to write holes. And then I'm going to write beetles, question mark. So I'm not really sure that those are from beetles. They might be from something else, so I don't want to make any assumptions. And there we go. So we've got a cross section. We've got this straight on view. and a few little strategies to make our mushroom look just a little bit more mushroomy. You might wonder to yourself, I'm seeing this crazy zigzag of gills under here. How do I go about drawing that? Let me show you a really easy thing to do. I'm going to draw a little box here. And in this little box, I'm going to draw a few little zigzag lines. And I'm going to draw a little arrow up under here and say dried gills. Gills are wavy, zig, zag. Now, why did I draw this little box? Why did I put this in a little box? The reason is that my attention span can handle drawing some wavy lines in a little box that's that big. But the minute I try to draw something that is as big as the entire base of this, at some point in there, I'm probably going to get distracted and lose my interest and go like, I'm tired of drawing these zigzags, and I'll get more sloppy. And that's not really helpful. So if I just draw, I can just make some little notes there, do a little section of it, and then what do you know? I've got a ton of information captured. What about the texture on top of this? There are these little peely parts, right? I'm going to put, what I can do is, if I want to save time and if I'm worried about like, how would I draw these? You can just pick a small section of it and be more careful there. So here is this little piece over here. There's another little piece. There's another one here. So here I'm kind of drawing these in piece by piece. And if I, am starting to kind of lose my focus, and you're thinking like, I'm tired of drawing all these little pieces in. Then what I'll do is I will draw then a little box around that part. And make a little note, cap covered with thin peeling skin. I'm going to put skin in quotes. Big patch. And I don't have, just like I did here, I don't have to do that for the whole thing. If I felt like it, I could, no problem. But you see, when we're taking notes like this, if we can take all sorts of little shortcuts that if there's a part of something that looks really complicated and it kind of makes me feel uncomfortable, I don't know how I would render that, just do a little piece of it and add in some written notes. As a matter of fact, anytime in a drawing you don't like the way that the drawing is going, just consider it a diagram and add in little written notes and some boxes and some insets, these sorts of things. What that does is it continues to raise the quantity of information here on this page. The amount of information goes up, and the work which you did to get that information there doesn't go up. So it becomes much more interesting because you now have this little page, this little sort of section with there's more data that you've recorded on the page. The more data there is, the more interesting the page will be, the more useful it will be to you as you're growing in your mycological sketching skills. So these are this top view, this side view, this cross-section view. These are pretty straightforward. We've got a few tricks which we can do to kind of make it a little bit easier. But things get really fun when you kind of get a 3/4 view and you can see a little bit of the underside, or you're looking at a 3/4 view down on the top, like that. So how do you handle that? What is the trick? I want to show you an approach that I use, that I find really helpful. And what I'm going to do is I am going to kind of go back to that little mushroom model, friend, and I am going to let's think about this cap. There's this flat side and there's the top side. Flat side, top side. Right. If we're looking at it at an angle like this, we don't see any of the underside. And if the center of it is here, right, we see a little bit past the top. So if I'm drawing one of these from, actually, let's start with a more difficult, challenging view. We're actually going to start with the view of the underside. Let's take a look at what is going on here. Oops. I have all these gills coming in. There's a little gutter right in there. All the gills come in down to the gutter. And notice that all these gills on this fresh one, instead of being zigzag, they're all coming straight in here. These ones are coming straight in here, coming straight in here, coming straight in here. This originally, we start to feel like, oh no, this is this really complicated structure. How will I handle drawing this? Well, let's simplify that. If gills are coming straight in, let's say this is a gill coming in from the side. I'm drawing, imagine another one on the other side. I can think of a cross. I'm going to hit a diagonal in that. I can think of all of these gills as pointing towards that spot in the center of the mushroom. Each gill is coming from the edge and it is pointing to this spot right there in the middle. So if I make a little diagram of that, what I'm talking about, let's draw that circle again. Here's the circle.
Oh, if you could lower just a little.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Here's the circle. And I'm going to just draw a line through the middle of it, trying to bisect that as best I can. Lightly, another one in here, maybe move that up a little bit. Here's another. Now I've got this spot in the center. And what I'm going to do is all my gills are going to point towards that spot. Unless it starts drawing out and then it does that lasagna thing we saw before, right? But all these gills are pointing towards that spot. Now, they never make it there because there is in the center, there's that bare zone. And then there's a stalk in there. But you see how thinking of those as pointing towards that center is really useful. Now let's check this out. We're going to go back to this. Right? If I'm looking at it from this view, easy to draw. What happens if I tilt it a little bit? Right? Now look at this. Now we're starting to see a little bit of the top of the cap here, but look down here. This shape here is an ellipse. It's a little oval. what we're seeing is an oval shape, and all those lines are still pointing towards the center. So this line that you see coming along here points to the center. This line here that you see points to the center. This points to the center. This points to the center. Notice that in this view, this line here is shorter than this line here. Can we make a diagram that contains all of this complex geometry? Yes, we can, and it's easy to do. Look at this. What we're going to do is lightly, loosely draw an oval. My top of my cap is going to be not as high as I would see it if I were looking at it from a side view. When I'm seeing a little bit of, see how the cap view, it's a little bit shorter up here. All right, so I'm going to give myself a shorter view of that cap. What's happening on the underside? Well, I'm going to draw, just as I did before, those crosshairs through the middle. This line here and this line here. That gives me this point in the middle. All of my gills are going to go from the outside edge, and they're going to point right towards that spot. So if there's a gill starting here, where is it going to go? It's going to point this way. If there's a gill starting here, it's going to point there. If there's a gill starting over here, it's going to point there. It's going to go 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 there. All the way out here, there's one starting here. It points straight to that spot. What about below here? I'm going to go straight out to the outside edge, straight out to the outside edge. And what about as we get down here? Up here, everybody wants to point to that little spot in the center. Now, my stalk is going to be blocking your view of that spot in the middle. So what I do is I'm just going to draw a little oval here, the same shape oval that I have here. I'm going to draw that same shape oval just a little bit smaller. And there's my stalk coming down from there. If I erase into that, all my gills are going the right way. So having a target right there, that's the spot that all your gills point towards. Now, sometimes when you cut your mushroom in half, you're going to see a shape like this. And those gills are pointing up. They're not, sometimes what you're seeing is those gills are, they're sort of a, you've got sort of a flat surface. Sometimes it's a slope up. See how these ones are, there's a, you can think of this one here as this shape. This one here is this shape. You can think of the underside of this as that shape. So if you look at this from the side, of course, the edge of the cap comes around here, but underneath there, those gills are going up. And you see that in your cross section. In a few other mushrooms that you look at, here's my cap. Those gills kind of come down the stalk like that. So we now have sort of a shape like that. Whoa. What do we do with those? With all of these, you want to think of the target where your gills are going to point. So if I have gills that are, I'm going to draw a cap of a mushroom here. And let's say I want there to be, Avea, are these gills that are pointing up into the cap or down out of the cap?
Down out of the cap.
Okay, so we're going to have our stalk is going to be coming down this way. And those gills are going to be attaching here on the stem. So what I'm going to do is I want to think of a line coming from the edge here and a line coming from the edge here through the place where they hit the stem, the stalk. I just said stem, right? And project those a little bit further down to a point right here. That's my target. All the gills on the underside here, I want them to point to that target. So I'm going to say line coming in here. I want it to be coming in here, line coming in here. I want to go down towards that target. All right, so gills are going to always want to point towards this target. These ones in this little drawing, everything's straight. Very often, these will actually have kind of a curve to them. So if I'm seeing that, then these gills are, if this one would maybe I'm going to give myself a target down here. So you can see how you can get these gills to come down to a target below. Now, let's have them go to slanted upwards. If this is my mushroom, let's say I have a target that is out of my sight here. Somewhere up in that cap, there's a target. I'm going to see gills on this back wall here. From there, I'm coming up to that target. Down here, I'm coming up to that target. I'm coming here up to that target. There's my target. I want to draw my line to that target. And then my stalk will be coming down, and here's the cap of my mushroom. That allows me to get these gills coming up there. I just have a target that is above the horizontal here. So if these were in a totally flat plane, I would draw my target would be in the center of this oval. If they hang down, my target is going to be someplace below. And all the gills are either going to point towards this point, some point above that, or some point below that. Or it could be anywhere in between those. But wait, there's more, right? Because I want to point out something interesting about these gills that I'm drawing. The gills, what color are they? I've got all these white gills, right? Now, the more white gills that I draw in with my black pencil, the less it looks like this mushroom. Right? Oh no, what do we do? Well, one solution of that is to draw with a white pencil on toned paper, which you can. If you're going to be doing a lot of mushroom drawings, it would be great to get yourself a little toned paper notebook. But what about if I don't have that? What do I do here? Let me point out this really cool phenomenon of looking at mushroom gills. This is a wonderful trick. I think I learned this from Jenny Keller at the who's one of the science illustration teachers at she then taught at UC Santa Cruz. Here's the observation. Look on the screen in this area right here. Notice this zone of dark. So that little dark stripe right there on the mushroom. Watch as I turn the mushroom. It's like you're looking down, that little dark zone turns as I rotate my mushroom. Look at that. You see that? What's going on? Isn't that a neat little phenomenon? Yep. Was there a question? Anytime there's a question, just please ask. So that's where what I'm seeing is I'm looking down into the cracks between these gills. Over here, I'm looking along the tops of the white gills. But down in here, I'm looking between the cracks. It's just like when you're driving past a field and all these things are planted in rows. You get these views up the row of the orchard, thump, 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 as you drive along. And so as you're driving along here on the mushroom, you're getting to see up those rows of orchard trees all the way to the bottom. But when you look along the side, you don't see that. So what does this mean? All right, so in this diagram right up here, right there, what I had done is I'm drawing in all these gills. Now, when I'm over here, those gills are really close together, kind of looking at them edge on. So I'm tempted just to draw in a whole bunch more gills in there. And then what I get is this dark underside of my mushroom. Now, on some mushrooms, that is what I see. But what if I'm drawing, like in many of these little mushrooms, what if I have a pale underside? This is such a clever trick. Let's give ourselves our little mushroom model. I'm going to have, here's my oval again. I'm drawing it lightly. Its cap is not going to be as high as it would be if I were looking at it in the side view. And what is it doing? It's going to, if this is the center of it, these are slightly tipped up, so it's going to be higher. My target is going to be higher than the center. All right. And my stalk is going to be coming from somewhere in there. And say it comes down here. So what I'm going to do is in this area in here, actually, first I'm going to just kind of give myself a cap. I've got a little cap that's got a few of these little kind of shaggy pieces. I'm going to curve it around here. The bottom edge of it is a little bit rough and shaggy. And so remember those little curving lines straight in here, curving around here, curving around here. So as I'm drawing these little shaggy pieces, these ones here are going to be kind of more oriented, more like teeth. And any little kind of curvy, as I come out here, I'm going to get perhaps more of a suggestion of these are going to be on arcs pointing up towards my top. And the top here has more shaggy. And my back edge, I'm going to use a little bit of a lighter line back here. On this back edge, if I draw it really heavily, it will really pull that edge forward. And I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to keep that back edge a little bit lighter. And now what do my gills do? Here's my target, not in the center because I want them to be slightly tilted up. Oh boy. This area in the front here, that's where I'm going to be able to see into those rows in here on the edge that points towards me. And so what I'm going to do is here I'm drawing in shadows between rows. And as I get out to the side, I'm now no longer looking down those rows, and I'm still pointing towards this, but I'm going to put in, still have to come here, a line here. So I've got these lines that are coming towards my target here, up slightly. In here, it's good to put in a few little kind of guidelines ones, just every once in a while kind of give yourself a little guideline that goes all the way to that target. Little guideline that goes all the way to the target. The target's here. I'm going to give myself a little guideline all the way to that target. And then what I can be doing is just filling in some other light ones. Because here what's happening here? This one is going to be coming in like that to that target. Towards the back, I might give myself a few darker ones as well. But you'll get this sort of this wedge of darker ones, this wedge of lighter ones. In the front and the back. So give yourself a few little flicks that just sort of say like, look, there are gills out here, but I'm not going to really draw in all the gills heavily, except for up here. And then a little bit down here in the corners. Now it does a very good job of suggesting that gill texture. So I want to do a time check. What time is this supposed to be wrapping up? I always lose track of time.
The meeting is officially over at 9, but it's only 10 after 8.
Good. All right,
You
that
don't have to
was
go the
what,
whole 2 hours, but I'm
well,
totally fascinated with what you're doing. It's great.
okay, fun. Well, if you're enjoying it, I'm having fun out here too. And so what I'm going to do is I wanted to just sort of take some questions about this sort of general strategy. And then what I'd like to do is to do a kind of more of a careful illustration of this. And I'll show you more of these kind of illustrator techniques and things as I play with this shaggy parasol here. So at this point, what I'd like to do is I am going to change my camera. Hi, it's me again. And I want to ask you, at this point of the things that we've gone over, are there any questions? Are there any parts of this that are kind of confusing, things that we can clarify before I kind of dive in with more of a illustrator approach? And what you can do is you can use the raise hand function. I'm also going to bounce over to my gallery view. If you have your camera on, you can just raise your hand, and I will see you raising your hand. And then, so let's join Marissa Dorn. Hey there, Marissa, you can unmute yourself and let us know your thoughts.
First of all, thank you so much. This is awesome. I feel like a pro already. I'm like, yes, this looks way better than mushrooms I've drawn in the past. So thank you. The ones where
Let's spotlight Marissa if we can.
the ones where you draw the gills as attaching downward down the stem look real dorky on mine still. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but
Okay, let's spend just a little bit more time kind of tweaking that, because you're right. That it's this sort of weird thing, and how do we make that just kind of look a little bit tighter? Could you hold that up one more time? Great. Right, I've got some ideas. And let me bounce over to this cam again. And there are a few things that are going to make it look weird. One is if some of my lines, as let's say I've got here's my cap, and I'm trying to come down to this little stalk here. And here is the edge of my cap. So if some of these lines are connecting here like that, it's not going to feel right. I want these to actually come down and go between each other on my stalk. So let's make this a little bit larger on the screen. Let's close out Marissa's share. Right. So if these are connecting into each other, that is going to it's going to look funky. See if these ones meet. So let me do this a little bit more carefully. Say I've got a cap up here, and I've got a central stalk down here.
Oh, Jack, could you please?
Yes, thank you. So here's my original shape. I'm going to have a target down here, And so this gill, here I'm looking between the gills. So this part between the gills is coming down here. And its next one and I want to think of over here, we're going to be something in between these. So I'm just giving myself a few little guidelines. So as I start to draw in these others, I can have some of them as short, others longer, but they're not meeting and touching. So very often you'll have shorter gills that will come down in between those. But I'm trying to not have them actually touch each other like that. So if some of these start to meet each other and kiss, then it's going to feel kind of wrong in there. So I guess diagrammatically on this edge here, I've got some that are shorter, some that are longer, some that are much longer. And that is a little bit of what is happening up in there. Was that useful?
Yes. It's still going to take me a while to get the hang of it, but that definitely clears it up. Thank you.
Great. Let's see if there are any other questions. I'm going to go to my gallery view. If anybody has a question, you can either use the raise hand function or turn on your camera and raise your real hand. And then I'll bounce over to you. And not seeing that, shall we do an illustration of the Shaggy Parasol? All right. I'm going to give myself a whole new piece of paper. Now, the view that you're going to have of the mushroom on the screen is going to be different than the view that I'm going to have on my piece of paper, because my angles, if I try to draw from looking at the computer screen, my brain then gets a little bit sideways. So I'm going to draw a view of this thing. And I'm going to get some of the cap. I want to get these lovely gills that are coming down on the underside. I've got this dancing, I can kind of have a dancing veil. Maybe it's going to be easier. I think it'll be easier if the little mushroom is off the screen. So I'm just going to sort of show you what my lines would be. And here is what I do. When I am starting an illustration, I usually block in my basic shape using this pencil. It's called a non-photo blue pencil. It's this erasable non-photo blue pencil that is really pale. It makes an extremely
pale mark. And the reason that I like that is that
I'm able then to block in my mushroom shape and get something that where I can get the general proportions of it. But the only disadvantage of, and before I do my drawing, so I'll block it in first with this pencil, and then I will go over that with graphite pencil or a pen. The only disadvantage is that when I'm doing that on Zoom, this camera doesn't like this pencil. You can't see it. So I'm going to be using a different pencil standing in for this one, but this one makes a darker mark that is a little bit sort of too much in your face sometimes when you are making a drawing on your own. So this is how I kind of make a preliminary drawing. Here's one thing I can do. I can kind of just get, it's about that big. And if I'm going to draw this life size, I now have a few little marks on my page that says roughly the top of it is here. And you'll see, oops, I'll bring this down a little bit. I'm going to draw a little bit more heavily. Just so you can sort of see my lines. I am sort of carving this, and it's not a really angular mushroom, but I'm kind of exaggerating these angles just so that it sort of helps me kind of initially block in the geometry of this thing. I've got an angle down here, so the lowest part is in here, it comes up in here. I have rows of scaly things on the top here, and my stalk is coming out here, and it's roughly this thick. So getting the proportions of how thick is your stalk to how thick is the stalk to the cap also will help your mushroom look more like the one that's in front of you. And this seems to be a little bit thicker when it comes out below that our little skirt. So this at this point, my mushroom it's looking very angular. These aren't the final lines though that people are going to see. Once I start to put my graphite pencil on top of this, you'll find that your eye really gets drawn to the that surface, the lines made by the black pencil, more so than these. Your brain will sort of ignore these background sketchy lines. I'm noticing that as I'm drawing, it's sometimes focusing on my hand. Are we kind of getting the focus of the screen sort of jumping around from my hand to the
Sometimes a little bit.
Okay, let me just bring on let's see. I am, there we go. I'm going to see if I can lock the, there you go. I'm going to lock the focus. And now, hold on one moment. Oh, that's not working. Oh, here's what I'll do. I'm going to try this one more time. I am going to share my screen. Oh, host has disabled participant screen sharing. Host, could you make me a co-host, please? Actually, this is kind of a good view, right? We can actually see them both.
This is good.
Yeah.
Yes, good.
Okay. So we're going to go with this. We're going to go with this. Now, good. It's not changing its focus. I'm going to start with kind of a graphite pencil drawing of this. I have the top edge here. As I'm kind of coming around the top edge, on this line, I'm going to, in some places, press a little bit more firmly, and in some places, let up on that, giving myself a variable line. Yeah, that's showing up. And it kind of rocks in, flares out, and I want people to think of this as curving around here. So I'm looking for places where there are lines that follow this contour as it rocks around here. So by putting in a line here that curves a little bit, and sort of some of these little kind of curving edges, that is going to help people see this as a curving top. And in here, a curved line, but not as curved as these. I'm not copying it bump for bump up here on the top. Some of these, I'm just sort of approximating the size and the angles of these little bumps that I'm seeing. But along where they come up against the edge here, I can have the edge of this bump stick out. And then people go like, oh, these little horizontal things are things that stick out. So you see there on this edge, actually, let's see if I can go down a little bit without killing my camera. So I want some of these things to stick out. I want people to say that, oh, these little bumps are textured bumps that stick out. And that's right here, that's the cue that they get, that those things stick out. And in this section here, I don't have as many of these little kind of wraparound marks, but I see there's a few little kind of shaggy things in here. I'm just going to put in a few of them to help people sort of see that this is also curving. Anything in here in the middle,
Those are going to come down more straight. And especially as I come across the top here, I'm going to hit this with a kind of a strong line. And the reason for that is if I draw with a heavier line, that will pull this part into the foreground in front of these elements that are back here. And as I come around in back here, I'm intentionally using a lighter line. And the feeling I'm going for is what I call regularly irregular. So I don't want to kind of get a pattern that is when I'm making things. So I want there to be, I don't want there to be kind of a clear organization to the marks that I'm making. My stalk's coming down out of here, and I'm going to start that with a lighter line coming down here, a hard line up on the part above it, a lighter line coming down. That puts this cap in front of these lines down here. Here's this little skirt, the ring. Notice what I did right over here in this area. I'll do a little diagram of it here, sort of in cartoon form. Here's the side of my stalk. My ring is, the outside edge of it is here. And I have this top edge that is coming in here, and then I put a little bit of a kind of an emphasis dot right there. That kind of helps this your brain sort of see like oh, this is, you know, this is curving around here. There's something that is kind of curving around there. From my view, I can see the little skirt. Sorry, that doesn't show up on your view, but if I show it to you, then I can't see it. I know I want to draw it. This is why you should go to the fungus fair. There will be all these wonderful things right there in front of you, and you can get them at the angle that you want. The experts are there. They're really beautiful events. Also, you kind of realize like this is such a fun community. I put in a few little striations in this stalk. A few little details go a long way. I don't want to overdo it. Notice on this line, in some places the line is heavier, in some places the line is lighter. This is what's called a dynamic line, and it's visually more interesting than something that just does that. If it's a line that sometimes is heavier, sometimes is lighter, that is a lot more visually fun and interesting. Putting a little hint of more of these striations in here. A very fibrous stalk. And then I have this base. This is where my mushroom, which is the fruiting body of the fungus, would connect into this web of underground fibers. So to kind of fill this part in dark, I'm making some hatching marks, little marks like this, and then turning my angle and turning it. So we've got a little bit patchy, so you kind of get a feeling that's a little bit clumpy. And as I get more up into here, I'm going to turn it into little dots, little bits of bark and things with a fungus matrix blobbed up around it. A few little details like some of these little fibers that are sticking out here. You throw some of those in and everybody thinks the whole thing is super detailed because you've got a few little crisp details like that. Now, I'm going to give myself, let's see, I'm figuring out where my target is. And the way I can figure out where my target is just I close my eye and I look at my mushroom and I trace with my pencil in the air over it and say, oh, you are traveling here up to this point, to somewhere, a point right up in here. And down in here, I'm seeing deeper into these cracks here, just like in the part that is close to me. I can see into those cracks on the part that is on the wall that is on the opposite side away from me. I also can often see deeper cracks. So I don't have to fill them all in. I want whoever is looking at this to do part of the work for me. If I suggest them, then their brain will fill in all the rest of them. If I draw them all in, they'll say, that one over there, you drew it wrong. Okay. And I think I've got enough here on my pencil sketch to for me to stop for now. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some watercolor on top of this. I like drawing with watercolor. If you put colored pencil on top of a soft pencil sketch, it really smudges the pencil around. But watercolor, you can draw your mushroom in, and if you're not using too much water, you can get this. You can get a really nice effect. Your paints dry fairly quickly, and you can get a lot of the sense of the object. When I do this, I very often like to start with I will start by putting in my shadows. And that's what I'm going to do here. And so for the shadows, I'm going to go grab my watercolor kit. Hold on just a second. Got my kit. Let's zoom down on you a little bit more. A few parts, actually, that before I do this, a few parts I want to make just a little bit kind of cleaned up. Right here where my skirt comes in, I think I want to make really clear that there's this outside ring that comes in, and the stalk is tucking around that. So it is this ring that is going around here. So I'm going to erase here just a little bit, and my stalk comes down. I'm going to go back in. There. Just to make that like a little bit easier to read. Are there any other little tweaks I want to make? I think I'm good there. All right. Now, I'm going to put the shadows in on this. The light's coming from this direction, from this side right here. So that means the underside of this cap is in shadow. That casts a shadow partially across the stalk. It casts a shadow underneath the ring, and it casts a shadow along this side. So if the light is coming from this side, imagine just this being a tree. On this side of the tree, there's going to be shadow. If there's a cap here, there's shadow underneath the cap. So now I have to pick the color for my shadow. So I'm looking at this, and shadows can be lots of different colors. I am going to bring in sort of a soft purplish, mostly gray color for this shadow. A little bit of brown in it. And I'm going to try to keep it fairly light. I want it to be a fairly subtle shadow. So the warm, peachy tones of this thing will come through. But where's my shadow? All right, so all underneath the cap, I have shadow. Sorry about the reflection on part of that. It makes it sort of a bright white spot out there in part of that. So there's shadow on the underside of the cap, and I can get it a little bit darker up in here. And while that's drying, I am going to get a little bit of shadow on the cap. This surface here is kind of turning down, and it's in shadow. And then there's a little bit of shadow across the stalk. Actually, I want this part in here to dry a little bit more before I get my brush up in here. So I'm going to drop down here and put the shadow that is underneath the ring. And that ended up being a little bit too strong. So what I'm going to do is just clean my brush off and come in there and touch into that, and it picks up some of that paint, and it's now not as strong a shadow. This side of the tree is in shadow, and you'll notice as I put this in that I'm not letting my shadow go all the way to the right side. So there's a very thin line of white along the right side.
I see that there's a hand raised.
Oh, yes.
Susan, did you have a question?
Yeah, my question was with that device that you're using, which I actually I haven't played around with it too much, but you said to try and do a dry watercolor. How do you control that with that pen you're using?
When it's fresh out of the box, I find that these sometimes have a little bit too much water that comes down the pipe. But after being used for part of a day, they start to cooperate a little bit more. And different brands tend to be either have more water that comes down them or less. This brand is made by Pentel. It's the Pentel Aquash water brush. And I really like them for kind of water control. It tends not to send out big globs of water at surprise times. And I find some other brands do. So I don't squeeze while I'm actually doing the painting.
Thank you.
Okay. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, so I've got I'm intentionally leaving some little edges of light along this. I've intentionally left a little light edge there, even though I don't see that on the real thing. This whole part, the top of this is in shadow, but I wanted that stalk to kind of stand out from that background. So I put in a little bit of light there, even though I don't see it. It's just going to help visually make that distinct. Along the top edge of the what is this? Of the ring here. And along the bottom edge, I'm letting that be white just to sort of have it be kind of a little edge that's turning out, catching a little bit of sparkle of sunlight on it. Underneath that, a little shadow again. And I should point out kind of something that I'm intentionally doing on the shadow on the side of this thing. Look at this. If this is I'll kind of do this more cartoon style. If this is the edge, this is the edge of the mushroom. Here's the other edge. I'm not coming all the way to the edge. I've got sort of a zone here that is my major shadow. And then as we kind of go into the light, I am making that transition with a few vertical lines that kind of break up that shadow. And that kind of also suggests the striations that are in this thing. Now, I am going to let this coat of paint dry. And as and then I'm going to put the rest of my watercolor right on top of it. If I don't let it dry completely, the colors are all going to blend into each other. But right now, I think that these shadows do help me kind of define the form of it. We put a little bit heavier shadow right in here. Maybe under some of these bumps. But if I don't let it dry, then when I put the next coat of paint on, they're all going to just ploosh together. So I have a secret weapon for blowing dirt all over my studio. It's a hairdryer. So I'm going to, so we don't have to sit here and watch paint dry, I'm going to hit this with a little bit of the hairdryer, and then that will get it dry so I can go on to the next stage. If you don't have a hairdryer in your own studio and you're doing watercolor, I recommend that you put one in. It's really, really handy. So here I go. There it is. Now, let's look at the colors of this. Right? It's white to a gray brown to a fairly reddish, warm reddish brown up in here. These little shaggy spots are kind of fibrous looking, and they're going to some very dark little, where they kind of wad up on themselves. It can be really dark. On the stalk here, I'm seeing a lot of kind of dark, but I'm also noticing that it's darkest in the place where I have been touching it and holding it. So I think that my fingers may be influencing how dark that part is. My veil is fairly light. And so I am now going to put in some colors. As I do, I'm going to try to leave on this mushroom, I'm going to try to leave some parts of it as being white, just the white of the paper. And I want those little white nuggets kind of sparkling back at me. So I'm intentionally going to leave some of these parts as little white nuggets. And then that will feel like little pieces of sunlight bouncing off of that. Let's see here, colors. There is this sort of peachy gray brown color that seems to be in a lot of it. And I'm going to get this at one angle, and I'll try to draw that angle. All right. So I'm bringing some of my, generally with watercolor, what people do is they start light and they then start to go darker.
What color are you using right now?
So this is some buff titanium mixed with just a little bit of the gunk that is in my palette. Buff titanium is this. And I'm just mixing, it's a wonderful kind of light, sort of mousy color that I find is wonderful for mushrooms and the underfur of mice and the bellies of birds. And I'm sure I could learn to mix it, but I really like just reaching for the paint. So I have to be intentional about leaving some parts of the paper white. Those need to sparkle through. I start lighter, and then I'm slowly, I'll bring my palette into here. There's some dark gunk mixed here on my palette. I'm going to pick some of that up. Sometimes it's a good idea to test that off on the side. That's too dark already. I don't want to, again, I'm going to go in 3 stages. I'm going to go light, then I'm going to go medium. There we go, that's medium. And there's some kind of medium blotches here. I want to, as I'm painting this, I want to remember the shape that it is so that my brush stroke can carve around those forms. I remember this is wrapping around here, and I want my brush to suggest those curves. Test your brush paint before it hits your paper. Another thing I can do with my brush tip here is I'm going to kind of fan it out a little bit. See what I just did? Look at the shape of my brush tip. What I did is it was pointed like this, and then I just took it and I fanned it, and that's going to give me, I'm seeing kind of this fibrousy texture on parts of this. And if I make little hatch marks with this, it's going to suggest that kind of roughness, necessary roughness. Fan it out, kind of keep it rough. This, let me just make some of these marks that I'm making off on the side of the paper here so you kind of see what this kind of rough texture of the brush does. See that? It sort of feels a little bit more shaggy. And that kind of fits into this feeling of this rougher texture. Now up here, some of these are brown segments. And then as I get further down, there are these, test my color, yep. I now have a darker color of paint, and so these next marks are really going to show up vividly, really, really strongly. So I have to do them in moderation. And not overdo them. Got dark brown crescents in here. And I've got, see, I'm carving and pulling these curves around the edge of this curved mushroom. I want people to feel this roundness. Now I'm going to go down the stalk here. There's a little bit of color in this, but I also want to leave a lot of white. And I'm also going to fan the tip of my brush out and see if I can just get a little hint of striation texture with a few little strokes of that. And then for real fun, I am going to pump up, look at how dark the dark is here, and look at how dark the dark is here. So if I give my clump of dirt some real darks, then the whole thing is going to feel much more, you get the feeling like, oh my gosh, we could do, like, this is the contrast. This is, I'm using just some dark blue and dark brown watercolor paint in there. And now I'm going to see if I can take a little bit. I've got this really, really dark paint on the tip of my brush. And so I'm going to come back in here in just a few places, add some darks into the upper part of my mushroom. And I think I don't want to do much more than that. The final thing I'm going to do is I want to show you my secret weapon. This is my secret weapon. It's a white pen. It's a gel pen. And I'm going to use this white gel pen just to pop a few little details into this. Before I do that, I'm going to make sure it's all dry. Dark just feels a little bit too dark and kind of monolithic, doesn't it? I'll show you something that's fun you can do. If the dark feels too dark, you can sometimes just bring a little bit of light back into it. I'm going into this paint that's already dry, and I am pulling out a few little light spots in that. Let it dry again. You'll see when the shine goes off that I'll have a little bit more variation. It shows up a little bit better on my cam here, my view of the thing in front of me. But I've got a few pale spots in that. And here's my secret weapon number 1 and secret weapon number 2. It's a white pencil and a white pen. So here's what I will do now is I am going to just hit a couple of these gills and imagine that they're just picking up a little bit of reflected light. And you see how, ooh, there's gills in there. All right, so I just put that in there. I'm going to put a few in here. Maybe a little bit of a hint of gillness here. This, purists in watercolor, they despise using a little pen like this, but this is my guilty pleasure. Just kind of get a little bit of a sense of some light hitting some of those gills. And then you want to keep doing it because it's so much fun, but you got to stop. I'm also
That is absolutely beautiful.
Isn't it neat how it makes those gills just pop?
Yeah, the whole thing is gorgeous.
And in just a second here, I'll be done. I'm going to put a few little mycelia down here. Again, mycelia are those little white fibers that make that are actually most of what fungus are. They're not that just every once in a while pop up. There's all these little white fibers underneath the ground, and every once in a while they pop up a mushroom for us to play with. But most of what they are is that stuff underground. Finally, I may also take just part of this edge here, strengthen it, kind of crisp up this edge as it comes across. I'm going to crisp this up as it comes across. So I just kind of, I'm now going back and I'm redefining just a few little edges and kind of key pieces of detail on it. And then it's done.
Fabulous. Totally gorgeous.
That, and I think we're just about at the hour. Oh, a little bit past the hour. 5 minutes past. So I'm sorry for keeping people up past your bedtime if you had a sharp deadline at 9 o'clock. Let me bounce over to this cam here and say that, so towards the end here, I was more kind of, this is more of making an illustration. And very often, I'm sitting comfortably at my desk. I've got a hair dryer, so things out in the field very often don't look like that. And also, I've been practicing this for a while, and the more you do this, the better you get at it. And so when you start doing this, sometimes like, my watercolor is not cooperating with me, and I'm trying to keep all these different things in my head. And that can be challenging. But know that if you just start doing this on a regular basis, they're going to get better and better and better. So your ability to see the structure in front of you, simplify that in your head, get that down on the paper. Also, your ability to understand, like, my watercolor brush works this way. I need this much water to get something that's that dark. Or when my paper is this dry, I get this effect. When it's this damp, I get this effect. If you want to be able to do that, the trick is just to keep yourself a little notebook, and as you go out mushrooming around, just make a bunch of sketches, and the more you do, the better it gets. It's not a gift that some people have and some people don't. It's a skill that you learn just by doing it on a regular basis. And you can absolutely do this. You can absolutely do this. Also, I'm going to suggest that folks work, life size. Mushrooms are like, they're these big chunky things. Sometimes what people do is they'll make little tiny drawings, and then it forces your hand to just be like, it's hard for our brain to do that. And it's a lot easier to kind of go larger, and you're worried about, like, oh no, I'll waste paper. No, you're learning how to observe mushrooms, and it will come. And if it gets too cramped on one piece of paper, just turn it over, and you'll find there's much more room there. And it's fun. I also want to encourage people to check out in our San Francisco Bay Area, we've got our Nature Journal Club. There's a group of people who are regularly going out in nature, looking for everything from mushrooms to birds, and sketching and drawing. And the Mycological Society has amazing field trips when it's mushroom season that you can get in on. You have to get yourself to the fungus fair. You really, really do. That will be a place where the Venn diagram of Nature Journal Club and Mycological Society will overlap very nicely with each other. And it's a ton of fun. And so think of drawing like this not as the goal of making a pretty picture of the mushroom, but by getting yourself to pay more attention to it and learn about it. And I want to thank the folks at the San Francisco Mycological Society for inviting me on to play with mushrooms with you today. And thank you so much for identifying my parasol. And Paul says it's edible and delicious. Oh, just are there any quick things that I should be aware of for kind of sketchy lookalikes? I probably shouldn't just go out and forage for these on my own until I spend some time with the Mycological Society in the field, seeing lookalikes that, like, Yes, no, yes, no, 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 no. Right? And here's why. They'll teach you all that stuff. The best way to do it is actually to learn from those experts in the field.